welcome you to How to Choose the Right Social Network from Silvertech. We are a digital marketing agency working to redefine how businesses engage with and understand their customers. To get the most out of today's webinar, here are a few tips. The presentation will last for 30 minutes. We'll have a Q&A to follow up. You can post your questions in the webinar chat pane if anything comes up along the way. And we'll have a brief poll at the beginning where your participation is greatly appreciated. This slide, the recording, and tools will also be made available after today's broadcast. And again, thank you very much for joining us. I'm your host, Griffin LaFleur, Senior Account Manager and Strategist here at Silvertech. I've been helping clients in a variety of industries navigate the ever-shifting waters of social media since the days when an organic Facebook post could reach more than 5% of your audience. Today I'm joined by Sean Howe, Silvertech's digital strategist and our resident social media marketing expert. Welcome, Sean.
Hey, Griffin. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thanks for being here. This is the third in our series of Lead to Loyal Inbound Summer School webinars. And if this is your first time joining us, you may be wondering, what is Lead to Loyal? It's creating a valuable digital experience at each and every touch point from first interaction through repeat business with your customers. By understanding each individual customer interaction, Lead to Loyal allows businesses to navigate and optimize the customer experience better than ever before. It's about building loyalty through the tactics and strategies here: SEO and SEM, web and mobile, content marketing, email marketing, and the topic we're here today to discuss, social media marketing. The agenda for today's webinar looks like this. We're going to cover a few bullet points, starting with the questions you need to ask as you evaluate a new network, personas and social network demographics, and then how to know if you're on the right network.
So before we dive into all of that, let's do a quick show of hands. How many social networks is your organization currently active on? And just pick from one of the options on the poll. I'll give you guys a couple seconds to do that. All right, looks like we have a pretty even split here between 1 to 3 and 4 to 6. So that's great. Thanks, guys.
Nice to see nobody's not active on social media.
Agreed.
Good start to your marketing. So in 2005, after Facebook launched, the Pew Research Center found that nearly 7% of American adults use social media. By 2015, that number had grown to nearly 2/3 of all American adults. Among adults aged 18 to 29, social media usage nears a staggering 90%.
So marketing is defined as a form of communication between you and your customers with the goal of selling your product or service to them. It follows then that if you want to effectively market your organization, to have to communicate with them where they are spending the most time, and that's social media.
For businesses, social media marketing was, at first, relatively straightforward. Create a Facebook page, share some photos, links back to your blog, and wait for the likes. But Facebook is now far from the only game in town. In fact, there are 188 other social networks to choose from. There's, of course, the other big platforms that make sense for a business: LinkedIn, Twitter, and Pinterest. But then there are fast-growing upstarts like Instagram and Snapchat. And let's not forget Google+, YouTube, Reddit, and Tumblr, as well as the opportunity to connect with your audience through messaging apps like Facebook's own Messenger.
In 2017, with many organizations finding that the social media marketing euphoria of the early days is stalling, how do you choose the right social network? And then
we're just talking about the number of other social media networks that were out there. But as we move on, when you consider this chart from the Pew Research Center, it makes perfect sense that every business and nonprofit would maintain a Facebook page. However, as any digital marketer knows, over the past few years, it has become much harder to reach your audience on the biggest social network. Pressure on Facebook from its shareholders for profit has throttled the reach of organic posts in favor of paid content. We'll have more on that on paid social in our next webinar next week, getting the most out of paid social. Fortunately, though, there's an opportunity elsewhere as long as you know where to look and what questions to ask. I would say that the first question to ask is it the right fit for my content? The main reason that you create content is to connect with your audience and help solve their problems. Social media is simply a component of your content marketing program, one of the channels through which you share your content in the hopes of connecting with new customers. Social media isn't the means to that end and not the end itself. It's important to avoid creating content for your social media networks, but instead create content for your audiences and then optimize that content for social networks. Sean, how often are your clients focusing on a social network that may not even be a right match for their content?
You know, it's interesting because a lot of the clients I work with, I would say about 50% of the time, they're on the wrong social media network. So it's either they don't have a presence at all, or they're on a lot of different channels that they don't need to be on. So I think one of the misconceptions is everyone thinks that they need to be on every single social channel, and that's just not true. So if you think about your content and what network that works best on, if we're talking about LinkedIn, that's probably for more of a B2B audience. If we're talking about Twitter, that's probably more conversational, shorter posts. So it really depends on what your content is and what your audience is. But I would say about half the time people end up being on the wrong network.
So if you don't have a clear sense of what your content is or should be, it's important to take a step back and document a content marketing strategy. We cover the value of doing so in a white paper, Developing an Effective Content Marketing Strategy, which is available for download now on our website.
So according to the Content Marketing Institute, organizations with a documented content strategy see a lot of benefits. And that includes, 1, far less challenged with every aspect of content marketing. They're generally more likely to consider themselves more effective with every tactic and social media channel. And they're able to justify a higher percentage of the marketing budget to be spent on content marketing. So really powerful stuff there.
With a sense of the content you have created and what you plan to create, you can then begin to evaluate the social media networks by what content works best on each. Jason Demers at Search Engine Land offers this overview of what content works on each of the major networks. Twitter and Facebook are both utilitarian networks with the ability to share text, images, and video. So it is likely that your content will be a match for both of those networks. In considering Pinterest, Instagram, and Tumblr, you have to ask yourself, is yours a visual brand? Are you using images? Or do you have or plan on creating video? If that's the case, then YouTube and Vimeo might be a good consideration.
Yeah, and like we were just mentioning, if your audience is B2B, LinkedIn is probably the ideal network for you. But if you need a boost for your SEO or your content, Google Plus is still a good choice, even though we've seen over the past couple years it kind of looks like an abandoned warehouse over there. Also, though, if you have a physical location that you're trying to drive traffic to, Foursquare and Yelp are going to be essential to have in the mix. But maybe none of those end up applying to you. And if that's the case, you want to consider diving into the network that calls itself the front page of the internet, which is Reddit.
Yeah, and that's an interesting, we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But Sean, one of the pieces of content we haven't discussed so far is on the audio side of things. More and more brands are starting to podcast, and I know you're an experienced podcaster. What networks are a good fit for audio content?
Yeah, podcasting is becoming a lot more popular, and if you're looking for the right networks to be on there, I would say SoundCloud is a great one to post on. It's great for hosting your stuff as well as tagging it in a way that can get found organically. Stitcher is another one that you want to make sure you're on, but the one for me I think that you absolutely have to be on is iTunes. That can be a really powerful driver of organic traffic. If you're writing good, solid descriptions that have relevant keywords in it, iTunes can really be a way to drive new listeners or get new followers.
Great. So after matching your content to the right network, I think you need to ask yourself next, is it a fit for my brand's voice? To answer this question, you'll want to refer back to your content marketing strategy. Not only does your content marketing strategy help you drive strategic, proactive, short-term and long-term content plans, it helps you establish brand standards and editorial direction for all content. Understanding your brand's voice can go a long way toward your social media success. It can help you avoid embarrassing gaffes as well as establishing consistency across all channels. According to a recent Sprout social survey, 71% of consumers have unfollowed a brand on social because they were embarrassed, and 41% admitted to unfollowing brands who don't share relevant content. Sean, in your experiences, have you ever unfollowed a brand just for publishing something cringeworthy or off-brand?
Absolutely. I've definitely done that before. I'll do it again as well if it arises. So I think the key here is authenticity. If you're posting too much or you're not coming across as authentic, that's a surefire way to get an unfollow from me. And I think if you look at the millennial demographic as well, that's an audience that really values authenticity. So if your brand isn't providing that to them, I think you're going to end up seeing a lot of that audience unfollow you, and you'll lose out on a big demographic.
So with an understanding of your brand's voice, you can also choose which network is right for you or not. Facebook and Twitter remain a constant, but it helps you as you consider up-and-coming networks or more niche networks. For example, Snapchat, following its recent IPO and massive user base growth, is enticing more and more organizations to add it to their roster of networks. On the other side, though, Snapchat, in the tone of content that it attracts, is youthful, exuberant, and often, to put it politely, cheeky. So before considering such a network, you'll have to ask, will I be able to maintain my brand voice if we begin to publish there? So Sean, thinking about Snapchat, should every brand jump in on the bandwagon? Or can you think of industries where it might be a fit and somewhere it most likely will not be?
That's a good question, and I think it's one that a lot of organizations are probably asking, and I think it really depends, though. I think higher ed is probably an industry that would work well for Snapchat. So if you wanted to show, sporting events on campus or campus visits or some other point of view perspective, I think that would be really valuable to put on Snapchat. But for any other industry, I think the same kind of applies. So if you're thinking about showing events or any of that real-time content, that's probably the best way to go. So you're really going to want to try and provide value in terms of, perspective and in a point of view.
Awesome. So after matching your content and voice to a network, you then need to ask, is my audience spending time there? Even if you are not considering a social network, it is important to ask yourself, is my audience there? And if so, can I reach them? To answer this question, you need to have an understanding of who your personas are and what the demographic makeup of each of the social networks are. Which brings us to our next section, personas and social network demographics. Personas, as we have covered in a previous webinar available on our website, are the foundation of personalized one-to-one communications. They're fictitious representation of your audiences, who they are, what they like, and most importantly, what they don't like. Through research and interviews, you will build your personas, which will likely take the form of a 1 to 2 page document containing the following: demographics, background information, motivations and influences of making a decision, as well as frustrations and barriers of making a decision, but also what the ideal experience is for those individuals. And Sean, when you're developing these personas, how are you able to capture the demographic information that you're looking to put into place as you develop, a persona like we see here on the screen?
So there's a few different ways that I go about doing this. The first one is the easiest, and I think everyone listening probably has access to this one, and that's just to check out your Google Analytics. So that's going to be a good way to figure out who's coming to your website, what their behavior is, what pages they're looking at, how they're engaging with your website's content. But the other thing that Google Analytics offers you is demographic information in the form of their audience insights. So everyone should be able to go in there and check out gender, age, geographic location, and you can see that breakdown as a good foundation for starting your personas. The other thing that you can take a look at is if you have a CRM system like a Salesforce or some other database like that, that's another great place to pull some information. Same if you have a marketing automation system. So if you have a HubSpot, a Pardot, anything like that, you can start to pull information from that as well. The other thing that we like to do when we're developing personas, and this one is a little more time consuming, is do interviews with your customers, with your stakeholders, with your users, really anybody who can give you an opinion on your website or on what you can offer them. So that's something that we'll do. We'll actually sit down with people for a half hour, and it really starts to give us a better sense of what their background is, what their motivations are, what's influencing them, what their frustrations are, and what their ideal experience is.
So when it comes to choosing a new network or evaluating a current one, the demographic section of your personas will come in handy. Our partners at HubSpot recently shared this infographic from Track Social, which collects the latest research from Pew, Nielsen, ComScore, and others. The main takeaways and network characteristics are as follows. Facebook is predominantly female, with 83% of online women using the social network and 75% of online men using it. This is also the best place to reach millennials and Generation X, those ages 18 to 49. But of course, it's the newly discovered demographic that it also reaches, the Zennials or the Xennials, a micro-generation between millennials and Generation X. So pretty interesting information there.
Yeah, definitely. And then if we take a look at Twitter, this one's kind of flipped. So we see this one being predominantly male, 22% of online men, compared to just 15% of online women. The interesting thing about this, though, is most users end up between the age of 18 to 29. So this one skews a little bit younger than it does for Facebook.
If we look at LinkedIn, we were talking about the B2B or more business-oriented social network. This starts skewing more slightly toward the male demographic as well. So 31% of online men are using it and 27% of online women are using it. So much less of a differential between them than we saw from Twitter. But one of the other pieces of demographic information, if you're really targeting a B2B audience, is that 45% of people on LinkedIn are making more than $75,000 a year. So again, thinking about who your customer is, the audience, and how you're trying to speak to them is important, even when it comes to income demographics.
Yeah, and if we take a look at YouTube, this one is also predominantly male, so 55% male compared to 45% female. But I think the really interesting takeaway from this, Griffin, is that YouTube reaches more 18 to 34 and 35 to 49-year-olds than any cable network in the US. So if you're trying to target those cord cutters, YouTube is the place where they're all living right now.
And if you're thinking about getting away from some of the video streaming services and you're very much more of a static image or visual brand, Instagram will also lean more predominantly towards females. 38% of online women are using Instagram and 26% of online men are using it. But this also skews towards a more younger demographic within the millennial range, where 90% of Instagram users are under 35. So a little bit different than some of our other social networks that we see that have a different demographic of age.
Yeah, for sure. And if we look at Pinterest, this one predominantly female, so 45% of online women are on Pinterest compared to just 17% of online men. This is kind of different from Instagram, though. We have an even distribution of ages here from 18 to 64. So you're getting a wide range of people that you can target on Pinterest.
With Reddit, which we mentioned earlier, we see a skew back towards the male demographic, with 67% of males using it and 33% of females or users on Reddit are female. But 64% of Reddit users are also under the age of 30. And we've talked about how this is certainly a niche network. Sean, have you seen any brands gain a foothold using it?
So specific brands, not so much. I don't think there's one that I can point to specifically, but I think when you're talking about it for, one of your organizations, if you want something to go viral, Reddit is really the place to start and make that happen. So Reddit ends up feeding a lot of the blog and Twitter conversations that end up happening on the internet. So if you want to go viral, that's really the place to go. But also, if you're looking to improve your SEO, and more specifically, if you're looking to grow your backlinks, that is a great way to do it as well. So a lot of the organic conversations around, your brand or your products or, whatever industry that you're in, it's probably starting on Reddit, and it's a good place to get conversation going and get people potentially linking back to your website organically.
So perhaps maybe from a Reddit standpoint, it's a place where people are actually talking about your business or your products. Yep. And, maybe it's a spot to jump in and join the conversation.
Absolutely. And it's a way that, you can reach these people without them coming to your website. So they're comfortable on Reddit. That's where they're having the conversation. It's kind of on their terms. And then, you can maybe get them back to your website at a later time.
So the last one we're talking about in Snapchat this one is very predominantly female, where 70% of all users are female. And 30% of U.S. millennial internet users use Snapchat regularly. So we're back talking about Snapchat, Sean. In your opinion, are users of Snapchat there to engage with content from businesses?
I would say no. I wouldn't say that users' first goal is to engage with businesses on there. However, I still think there's opportunity for organizations to make footholds in Snapchat. As long as your content is useful and relevant to the people who are on there, it doesn't really matter if it's your brand or their friends or whatever it might be. So, if you can post some promoted stories or something like that and reach that audience, and it's something that they want to engage with, there's still opportunity there for you.
So once you've gathered the demographic details of your personas, finding the right network is just a matter of matching where your personas are and most likely spending their time. So how do you know if you're on the right network? From Forbes, we learned a little bit about that finding where your company fits on the social media spectrum and spending a majority of your time on the 2 or 3 platforms that will yield the best results is a far more advantageous option than trying to capitalize on all platforms and getting mediocre results. So we saw earlier that the group was split 50-50 in terms of using 1 to 3 or 4 to 6. I'm sure that it's possible that the users using 1 to 3 would like to explore other avenues, but maybe some of the 4 to 6 are seeing these mediocre results that we just heard from this quote from Jaya.
Yeah, and that kind of speaks to what I was talking about before. With a lot of the clients I see, they feel like they need to be on all of the social networks, and sometimes that's just not the case. So if you are one of those 4 to 6 people, maybe take stock of where you're at and if that's also where your audience is.
So once you've decided where to focus your social media efforts, the best indicator of whether or not you have made the right call is the organic reach and engagement of your posts and tweets. The specific stats that you choose to measure will be specific to your organization and your social media strategy, but here are a few important benchmarks from Buffer Social. Total engagement, which also means the sum of all likes, reshares, replies, and clicks, is a good metric to measure, but also the reach and impressions. So how many people are actually seeing this, and how far are we getting our content out there into our audiences? So do you have any insight, Sean, into what else is important to measure when trying to gauge whether or not you're on the right social network?
Yeah, obviously the clicks, the impressions, the reach, all that's going to be really important, and you can see that right in your social media accounts. One of the other ones that is specific to Facebook is taking a look at when your audience is most likely to be spending time on that particular social media network. So if you log into your Facebook account, you can actually see what time of day they're most likely to be on. So you can try and tailor your content or your posts around the times people are most active. The other thing to take a look at is jump back into your Google Analytics and filter your traffic by the social media channels that you're interested in. And then you can start to take a look at what the engagement is, how long have they been on your website, how many pages are they looking at, what pages are they looking at, what are the most popular ones on there. And then you can start to tie that back to some of the goals that you've set up on there and actually start to track conversions from social media so you can start to close the loop on that.
So there's always a chance that you're on the right social media network, but your posts aren't performing as well as they should be. As we addressed in the beginning of the presentation, organic reach also isn't what it should be. So as you can see in the chart here, the bigger your audience, the lower your organic reach. It's clear that the social networks are no longer free, and it may take time to focus your efforts on paid social for the results you're looking for. Again, this is a topic we'll discuss in next week's webinar.
It could also be that you're just not posting the right way or at the right time. So kind of what I just mentioned before. So let's briefly address some posting best practices on each of the major networks we've discussed today.
So thinking about Facebook, there's a character maximum on status updates of over 63,000. However, we found that the ideal length is only 40 characters. So you don't need to utilize all that space. So think about using more digestible pieces of content for your statuses. And in this chart, we can see some ideal video length times. Now, while Facebook allows for a 120-minute maximum on videos, the ideal length is clearly in the 2-minute mark in terms of engagement, and will continually drop as the longer your videos get. In Twitter, there's a 140 character maximum. This does not include images, videos, polls, or quotes of other tweets, so it's important to think about when you're sharing or posting anything on your own. But the ideal length for most engagement is actually a little shorter than 140, so you don't need to use up all those characters if you shoot for the 120 to 130 range. We also have seen with a lot of clients, and even on our personal Twitter feeds, that a lot of people overuse hashtags. I would say from a best practice standpoint, use no more than 2. And also similar to Facebook, the maximum video length is 2 minutes and 20 seconds, so try to shoot below that, within that range for the most engagement. In LinkedIn, there's a lot more flexibility because these types of posts on LinkedIn can be treated even as supplemental blog posts, thought leadership, sharing, and things like that. So you do get a post headline limit of 100 characters, so you can get an actual title in there, and then a body post of 40,000 character limit. So again, pretty similar to the length of what we would see from a blog post. Mm-hmm. In Instagram, one of the key indicators of success is your bio in terms of how people understand what your page is about. This is great to keep to that under your 150 character maximum. In your specific posts, you're allowed a maximum of 30. I would say sort of find yourself in the middle of that range. Use more than 2 like you would on Twitter, but don't make your entire post numerous hashtags, because as we can see, the ideal length is under 125 characters. So if you stick to that range, you'll get the most engagement. With Snapchat, we do see our strictest character limit. It's partially because of how they allow you to put text on there, and we're only allowed 80 characters per post on Snapchat. But since we've talked about it a bit today, Sean, do you have any other tips on how you can optimize Snapchat posts?
Yeah, so this has been a problem I've run into, is running out of characters on your Snapchat. So, we've talked about how Snapchat, it's a little bit more fun, it's a little bit more light. Throw some emojis in there. Use some of the stickers that they have. You can even use the drawing capabilities that they have on there to kind of put an extra flourish onto your picture, embellish that a little bit. So those are the ways that you can kind of, stretch some more characters out. But I would make sure that your videos or your pictures or whatever you're sharing kind of speak for themselves, so you don't have to rely on that 80 character limit.
So if you're adhering to the guidelines that we've just talked about and still not seeing the results you're looking for, it may be time to consider a social network that matches more of your persona's demographics. When evaluating your current social platforms or considering joining a new social network, ask yourself these 3 questions. Is it a right fit for my content? Is it a right fit for my brand's voice? And is my audience using this network?
So in order to determine if your audience is on a given social network, match the demographics of your key personas with the demographics of the particular network that we had talked about. And then research institutions such as Pew, they regularly publish social network demographics as well, so you can take a look at those.
Keep your eye out on those. Once you've answered the above questions and match your personas to the right network, the final criteria for evaluation is the performance of your posts. So if after adhering to the publishing best practices for your particular network, you're still not seeing the results you had hoped for, it may be time to experiment with paid social. So just an overview, in next week's webinar, we will cover just that, how to get the most out of paid social media advertising. So next Thursday at the same time, 2 o'clock on July 27th, we'll be having another webinar, Getting the Most from Paid Social, in a fourth of our series of summer school Lead to Loyal webinars. I want to thank you all for joining us today. Just a reminder, the slides, handouts, and on-demand video of today's webinar will be made available after today's broadcast. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us. We hope you enjoyed, and we hope you'll join us next week for Getting the Most from Paid Social.